Listen up, my friends. I got a theater pick that you won't want to miss. Get your tickets now to Timeline Theater Company's Chicago premiere of Debate, Baldwin versus Buckley. Presented in partnership with the American Vicarious and the Theater School at DePaul University, the show depicts the historic debate between author and civil rights leader James Baldwin and William F. Buckley Jr. The reader calls it a razor-sharp dissection of the ugly truths of race in America. Debate, Baldwin versus Buckley is running now through March 2nd at the Cordo U Commons on DePaul's Lincoln Park campus. Visit timelinetheater.com for more information and tickets. Today on CityCast Chicago, I feel like the city is still recovering from that back and forth budget season last year. But it wasn't just some of the mayor's relationships in City Hall that took a downgrade. One of the nation's credit agencies felt it was contentious enough to lower the city's credit rating. But what exactly does that mean for the nation's third largest city? And is this just a bad headline everybody ran with, or will this impact the city's growth moving forward? It's Monday, February 10th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. We're joined by Dr. Amanda Kass, who studies public finance at DePaul University. Amanda, welcome back to CityCast Chicago.
Thank you so much for having me.
Amanda, people really love the episode we did with you about Chicago's pension problems. Now, I got an even more basic question for you. When we are talking about the city and state, what even is a credit rating?
So it's basically a credit rating agency telling investors how risky is it to loan money to the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago. So the higher the grade, the less risky it is. The lower the grade, the more risk there is.
Now, I know on my personal credit rating, like how that impacts my ability to take out a loan for a home. Like, can I get an apartment? People might check my credit when I'm trying to, try to buy a car. But how is a credit rating for a whole ass city different from my personal credit score that the landlord looks up before I rent the apartment?
So at a kind of basic concept level, there's some similarity, but I think it's important to take a step even back and contextualize when we're talking about credit rating, what are we talking about? What are they for? And so credit ratings are tied into the municipal bond market. So when a city or a state is going to be doing an infrastructure project, a capital program, let's say the city of Chicago wants to build more affordable housing, rather than paying for that with money that's in the bank, what the city does is it goes out and it issues debt. The debt's called a bond. And similar to a mortgage, you've got the principal amount, but then you also have interest on the bond. And so the city goes out and it issues the bond, and then it's going to pay back that bond over a set period of time. Part of the process is the city gets a credit rating from the credit rating agencies. There's 4 of them. So the credit rating agencies operate independently from investors who buy the debt. So credit rating is a signal to investors about the credit worthiness of the city, but credit rating agencies don't dictate the interest rate.
Got it. So I'm thinking of an example like Brandon Johnson's big bond proposal to pay for affordable housing. That was $1.5 billion. Chicago isn't paying for those programs with $1.5 billion out of like the city's pockets or the city's accounts. He's essentially paying for that using
bond proceeds.
Nice.
Exactly. The idea is that you're kind of investing in this program and it's going to kind of spur more economic growth, economic development. And so in theory, bond debt should never be used for paying for recurring services. So you don't want to be using bond debt, for example, to pay for city employees' salaries in this budget year. But the city of Chicago has used bond debt for operational expenses in the past.
When we're thinking about the affordable housing, the $1.5 billion in bond proceeds for affordable housing, the thought there is we get more people in homes, get more people in apartments, get more people on their feet, and that finds its way back to the city through income tax, through sales tax, through property tax, and things like that.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be kind of a more efficient and kind of cost savings way to finance using debt rather than having the money all up front.
Got it. What kind of factors impact the city's credit rating year over year?
So all of the credit rating agencies, they have different methodologies and procedures for how they assign the credit ratings. Credit rating agencies, your listeners might remember, played a kind of notorious role in the 2008 financial crisis. And so there's been a lot of change in the municipal bond market and the credit rating agency world. So their methodologies are actually publicly available. There's a lot of data, a lot of criteria that go into it. I'm not going to go into too much detail because that will bore people and take up way too much time. But broadly, there's broad areas. So they take into consideration the city's economy, right? Is the economy growing? Is it shrinking? They look at the tax base. They look at the city's financial and budget management. Does the city have a diversified revenue system, or does it rely solely on one tax? They look at governance and management practices. And then they also look at debt. This includes outstanding bond debt and as well as pensions. And so Chicago is unfortunately an outlier among other major cities for its very large pension debt.
Which, again, we have sat down and talked to ad nauseum. Some of the names of agencies people might be familiar with: Moody's, S&P, Fitch. So when they take in all of those different factors, are they spitting out a number for the city of Chicago? Like they got a 600 credit rating right now. They got a 850. I know they ain't got no 850 because we wouldn't be having this conversation. But like, is it on the same numerical scale as each of us as individuals?
It is not on a numeric scale. So the credit rating agencies are generally using an alphabet. So Standard & Poor's S&P is the one that just downgraded the city of Chicago. And so their scale goes from AAA is the highest, down to D. And importantly, within the credit ratings, there's a really big split between what's considered investment grade and what's considered speculative grade or junk bond status. It's a really big, important distinction. The city of Chicago right now is at a triple B rating with S&P. Well, it's one kind of letter above junk bond status. So junk bond would be double B.
Ooh.
And then, okay, to add a little more complexity, so there's these letters, but then there's also pluses and minuses. So Chicago, S&P just downgraded the city of Chicago from BBB plus to BBB. There's also BB negative.
Okay. I'm a professor. You're a professor. So I kind of get B plus versus B versus B minus.
Yeah.
I can kind of gel with that. But these aren't like necessarily good Bs, because to be one step above junk bond sounds terrible. So explain to me, what's the problem with junk bond status besides it just sounds like a real crummy name to have put on you?
So it can impact who can buy debt. So not there can be stipulations for investors that restrict them from buying junk bonds and that they can only buy investment grade. So municipal bonds are packaged into kind of debt that can fund retirement accounts for your everyday citizens. Not everybody's going to be buying junk debt. There can also be clauses in bond statements that penalties get triggered if the city's downgraded from investment grade down to junk status. But I think more importantly, it's a big signal about the city's financial health. So we care about these credit ratings because it's telling you something about the city's financial health. And so a downgrade is kind of a negative picture that's being painted about the city's finances, and there should be concern about kind of the future budget years.
What's up, y'all? I got a couple quick questions for you. Have you ever wanted to learn how to make your own book plate? What about study the history of flamenco? Maybe take a writing workshop? Well, you can explore your curiosity at the Newberry Library by taking an adult education class this winter. The classes are led by experts and they're available online, if you're trying to learn in your pajamas, or in person if you're trying to go out, learn, and meet some new friends potentially. Adult education classes at the Newberry can help you jumpstart or elevate your learning. I got a couple more examples if you ain't convinced yet. You can reinterpret historical photographs of Native Americans, learn about the ins and outs of translation, and so much more about music, history, literature, and art. Adult education has been a tradition at the Newberry since the 1890s, so don't wait. Register now at newberry.org. Just click on Learn and Adult Education Classes to get started. Plus, enter promo code CityCast to get a 10% discount on your class. That's newberry.org, promo code CityCast. How has Chicago's credit rating changed over time? I know it was recently downgraded, but in the last, couple of decades, what has that shift looked like?
Yeah, so if we go back in time, there was a bunch of downgrades in the around 2015. At that time, Chicago was grappling with how to deal with unfunded pension liabilities. That was during Rahm Emanuel's tenure. And then recently, in the past couple of years, 2022 and 2023, I think there was some credit rating upgrades as well as outlook changes. So in addition to changing the actual rating, the credit rating agencies will signal that there is a likely credit rating change coming with an outlook. And an outlook can be positive, saying, hey, we think we're going to upgrade you, stable, there's not going to be any change, or negative, giving you notice that if you don't get yourself together, we're going to downgrade you. And so the upgrades that happened in 2022, 2023 were somewhat tied to Mayor Lightfoot's advanced pension payment plan. The credit rating agencies really liked that because it was showing a commitment to funding the pension systems, trying to kind of really tackle that pension debt. And, the city's budget was boosted in those years with the COVID relief money that came from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe we got to A- at one point.
Fitch and Moody's upgraded the city of Chicago, but S&P only changed its outlook for the city. So it hadn't changed the letter grade.
Got it. Well, when S&P announced that they were downgrading the city's rating last month, the city put out a statement basically saying, I don't know if I agree with that. Does that do anything at all? The city coming out and saying, maybe go back to the drawing board?
It just conveys the city's unhappiness over the credit rating. Again, the credit rating agencies are assigning this letter grade, but that doesn't directly impact the cost of debt that the city issues, because investors are the ones who buy the debt, and investors oftentimes do their own analysis. And so there can be disagreement between what investors think and a credit rating agency thinks.
Let's talk about the state for a little bit. Why is Illinois' credit rating currently better?
If you think back, the state of Illinois' credit rating was really negatively impacted during the Rauner budget impasse years. And so the credit rating, there's a series of downgrades. And so the state of Illinois has dug itself out of that hole. So too have there been these credit rating upgrades. And the credit rating agencies have kind of cited structural changes in the state's finances. And so what the credit rating agencies are looking for is long-term changes in stability and addressing a structural deficit. And so they view favorably if the state is addressing budget deficits with long-term fixes and not just one-time plugging budget holes. The state of Illinois has also been building up its reserves through its budget stabilization fund. The state has also consistently been putting more money into its pension systems than is required by state law. The state pension systems are also better funded than the city of Chicago's. So the state pension systems are about 45% funded. Chicago's pension systems are only 25% funded. Those numbers are both very low. You want a pension system to be fully funded, 100%. But the state is doing better than the city.
Got it. So even if you have, pension debts that you need to address, even if, like, because right now, the budget conversation in the state is still looking to fill a budget hole. But if that process moves along maybe with less contention than the city of Chicago's process, is there a chance that, or essentially what I'm saying is, it feels like because of the issues they face, if they go through a contentious budget process, that could impact their credit rating. But if the process moves more smoothly, they may be able to hold steady.
For sure. So in Standard & Poor's downgrade, some of what they talk about is the budget negotiation. So if you remember, Mayor Johnson kind of initially came out and proposed plugging part of the deficit with a significant property tax increase. And there was a huge political backlash from that. And so I think one concern from the 2025 budget season is the contentiousness over raising revenue in a recurring way to address the budget hole. So the city of Chicago kind of cobbled together a variety of measures to plug 2025, but there's likely going to be budget gaps again in 2026 because the structural imbalance has not been remedied.
That is really interesting because throughout this process, as the fighting had gone back and forth between the Johnson administration, city council, and the like, I had no greater sense that just how this argument looks and thus the solutions they come up with could then have an impact on the city's rating. But when we think about this in a practical way, like, how does this play out in Chicago? Does the city's credit rating affect whether stuff gets built or our ability to get services this year or the next?
So not necessarily. So I was looking this up a little bit. So again, the credit rating has some relationship to the interest that the city pays on debt that it issues. But I was looking it up. So New York City and San Francisco both have much higher credit ratings than the city of Chicago. But all three of them had about the same interest rate on the last bonds that they issued. So even though they have different credit ratings, it's not a clear differentiator in terms of the interest rate they pay on debt. In theory, though, the lower credit rating might increase the cost of issuing debt. And so it could make capital programs, building affordable housing more expensive, could mean having to scale back the plans. But there's not kind of an immediate impact. Like, you're not going to see it visibly in the budget the same way you would if the city's property tax revenue collection suddenly dropped. Because again, the interest rate is supposed to be about issuing new debt, and the debt isn't supposed to fund operating programs. The credit ratings generally don't kind of play out in the budget debates exactly because, again, the budget debates are focusing on the operating expenses and the revenue. And so that's really focused on kind of this 1 year look versus the credit rating is about the interest on bonds.
Got it. It kind of begs the question, though, of, like, outside these yearly budget debates, are lawmakers really thinking about long-term finance solutions? Because throughout Chicago's budget address, some of the solutions put forth, foregoing the pension payment, for example, asking Chicago public schools to take out a high interest loan. These are things that, on the face may plug a hole, but they don't seem like the best long-term solutions, which, as we talked about in our pension conversation, that lack of foresight is one of the things that has put Chicago in the position it is now.
Yeah, it's a tricky balancing act that lawmakers have to make, right? They need to take into consideration taxpayer preferences on taxes, which nobody ever wants their taxes raised, right? Nobody's ever saying, like, hey, I want to pay more in income tax.
That's how a $300 million property tax proposal over time gets whittled down to nothing.
Exactly. But at the same time, residents also want investment in their city, in the state. They want quality education. They want good amenities. They want roads that aren't filled with potholes. And then also they do need to care to some extent of what the credit rating agencies are thinking because they finance these capital programs with issuing debt. And so they do care about what the credit rating agency is. And then again, in addition to it potentially impacting the cost of debt, it's a grade on the city or the state's finances. Nobody wants to be the governor or the mayor that's getting credit rating downgrades. The municipal bond world is kind of wild. Like it's a whole other language. Like they don't even use the term interest rate; they use coupon, and they talk about things of like what the coupon is, what the yield is, like what's par.
It feels like it is, in some ways, purposefully difficult and obtuse as a way to sort of say, you don't need to focus on this. Let the politicians and the lawmakers deal with this. But, I think it's important for us to really break these things down in layman terms and understand how does something that, again, on its face may not impact our everyday life in Chicago, but does impact the overall fiscal health of our city and what our city may or may not look like in the years and decades to come, what it's able to do, build. And so I really appreciate you making time for us today, Dr. Amanda Kass.
Thank you so much.
We can't let you go without some good news. The United States Mint and the National Women's History Museum are partnering with the DuSable Black History Museum and Education Center for a free celebration of Ida B. Wells and the launch of the new quarter in her honor. It's Wednesday. Registration is still open and going fast. They're going to have a film screening and everybody in attendance will receive the Ida B. Wells commemorative quarter. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.